Hello, how are you today? Are you feeling brave and strong? Or are you feeling a little bit scared and worried about things? Well, in today's true story from the Bible, we're going to hear about 3 young men who I think were very, very brave. At the end, I'm going to ask you why you think they were able to be so brave. But first, what can you remember about last week's Bible story? Can you remember the name of the king who had a dream about a big statue? What was he called? He was called Nebuchadnezzar. It's a long name, isn't it? Do you remember what's happened to the statue in the dream? It was destroyed. And what did the dream mean? It meant that one day all the kingdoms of the earth will have been destroyed by God's everlasting kingdom. And you remember Daniel, a young man who had been taken from his home in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon to serve King Nebuchadnezzar. And God had given Daniel special understanding, and he told him what Nebuchadnezzar's dream meant, so Daniel was able to tell the king. Now here's a picture of Nebuchadnezzar. Now in this picture he's wearing a crown, a little bit like our kings and queens wear, but I think that actually his crown would have been more like this, so we're going to give him a Babylonian crown. So Daniel explained the dream. Well, Daniel had 3 friends who'd also come from Jerusalem. And these friends were also very wise because God had given them special wisdom. They were called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now I know people called Daniel, but I don't know anyone called any of these. Maybe you do. Well, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego and Daniel were all given important jobs by King Nebuchadnezzar. And he knew that they were clever people. One day, for some reason, King Nebuchadnezzar decided he was going to build a statue. Now this one wasn't quite like the one in his dream. It was made of gold and it was enormous. It was 27 meters high. Now that's actually higher than one of the sails of Twin Sails Bridge when the sails are up. And it was 2.7 meters wide. He said that when the statue was finished, they were going to have a dedication day. Now sometimes in our country when we have a new hospital to open or a plaque to unveil, we ask a member of the royal family or an important local person to come along and open it. But this one was going to be a bit different. People who had important jobs in the kingdom, whether they were officers, administrators, other kinds of officials, they were told that they had to come to this dedication. Now, of course, that included our 3 young men, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, because they were actually administrators. So here we are, and we have Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. And they were at the dedication of the statue. Well, I said it wasn't like a normal dedication in our country. A herald was sent to make a special announcement. A herald is a bit like a town crier, if you've ever seen a town crier reading out the news or special information. And this is what he read. Nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. A furnace is like a room filled with fire. So what he actually meant was that they would die, they would be killed if they didn't bow down and worship. Well, I guess most of the people in Babylon at the time were quite used to bowing down to statues and false gods and even to the king. And so when they heard the sound of all those instruments playing, they did what the herald had told them. They bowed down. But Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego worshipped the one true God, and they knew that God had told them and told his people never to worship or bow down to an idol, a statue, or another person, but only to worship him, to worship God. So when the others bowed down, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego stayed standing up. Well, I don't know, but I think that possibly when Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego were given such good jobs in the kingdom, it might have made some of the men a little bit jealous, and they saw their opportunity to get back at Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. So they went and told tales on them to King Nebuchadnezzar. They said, "Oh, king, live forever. There are certain Jews in your kingdom to whom you have given very important jobs who are not bowing down to the image that you've set up." Well, King Nebuchadnezzar was angry, very angry. He wasn't used to people disobeying his orders. So he summoned Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego to come to him. And he said, "Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, what is this that I hear? Is it true that you're not bowing down to the image?" He decided to give them a second chance because they were good workers. So he said, "This time, when you hear the sound of the music playing, make sure you bow down to the image." But Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego said, "O king, we will not bow down to the image of gold you've set up." And Nebuchadnezzar said, "What God is going to be able to rescue you from me if you don't bow down and you're thrown into the furnace?" And Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego said, "The God whom we serve is able to rescue us from you. And even if he chooses not to rescue us, we will not bow down." They were determined to serve God and to be obedient to him. I wonder what you would have done, what I would have done. Would we have said, "Well, maybe just this once. I know God said not to, but maybe I can just do it once to save my life"? Well, they definitely didn't do that. They said, "No, we are not going to bow down and worship an image." Now, I don't think they said that because they thought that they could find a way of escape. I'm fairly sure they said it because they trusted God completely and they knew that he knew what was best for them. Well, this made the king so angry. He was fuming. Maybe he was jumping up and down in rage. I don't know, but I expect he'd gone red in the face. He was so cross that he ordered that the furnace should be heated 7 times hotter than normal. Now, I have felt the heat of a normal furnace from a few meters away, and I can tell you it was very, very hot. 1,000 degrees hot, actually. So this furnace in Babylon, once it had been heated extra hot, would have been absolutely terrible. He also commanded some of his strong soldiers to come along and to bind up Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. He said, "Tie them firmly and then throw them into the furnace." So Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego were tied up really firmly and they were thrown into the blazing furnace. Wow, what do you think? Was that the end of our brave men, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego? Well, no, it wasn't. After a little while, King Nebuchadnezzar was so astonished he jumped to his feet and he said, "How many men did we throw into the furnace? Didn't we throw 3 men into the furnace? Well, how come I can see 4 men, they're untied, and they're walking around in the furnace. Who do you think the 4th man was? Nebuchadnezzar said he looked like a son of the gods. Well, maybe it was Jesus. Maybe it was an angel. I don't know for sure. But I do know it was God's way of protecting Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. So the king called them out of the furnace. He said, "Come out, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego." So out they came. And people gathered around and they had a sniff. And they couldn't even smell the smell of smoke on their clothes. Nothing was burnt, even their hair wasn't singed. And they were completely unharmed. And now King Nebuchadnezzar realized that God, the God whom they worshipped, was greater and stronger than he was, and stronger and greater than all of his false gods. And he gave Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego even more important jobs in the kingdom. Sadly, Nebuchadnezzar still didn't really worship the one true God. But he did, I think, learn a lesson that day. So a few questions. Who was thrown into the furnace? Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. Why were they thrown in? Because they wouldn't bow down to the statue, because they knew that God said not to bow down. And how were they rescued? Well, God rescued them, didn't he? Now the important question, how did Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego manage to be so brave? Well, they knew that God is more powerful than any kings, any false gods, any idols. He is the one true God. Now, we might never be thrown into a furnace for being a Christian. I certainly hope not anyway. But sometimes we do have to be brave, don't we, to live God's way. Brave perhaps to tell our friends that we're Christians. Maybe they ask us what we do on Sundays, and we haven't quite got the courage to tell them that normally we go to church, or at the moment we're watching church online. Perhaps when we're actually allowed to meet together again, our friends might want us to go with them to play sports or other hobbies on Sundays when we could be in church learning more about God and worshipping him with other Christians. It might take courage to live God's way sometimes, but we need to ask God for the help to do that. In some countries, Christians are thrown into prison, or even worse, because they are Christians and because they meet together or have a copy of the Bible in their house. God understands that we're scared sometimes, but he doesn't want us to be. Now, I'm going to read some words that God spoke to a man called Joshua quite a long time ago. And Joshua was about to become the leader of the people of Israel and the leader of their army. And actually 3 times at least God told him to be brave, to be bold. So let's read this together. Ready? It's not falling down. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. That's Joshua 1 verse 9. And it's a really good verse to learn and to remind ourselves of when we're feeling scared. Because it wasn't just Joshua God promised to be with. He's promised to be with all of his people. So if we're a Christian and we're following God's way, then he's promised to be with us. So it's worth learning that and remembering it. I'm going to pray now and ask God to help us to be bold, to be strong and courageous, and live his way to please him. So we're going to pray. Okay, dear God, thank you for looking after Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. Thank you for helping them to be bold and strong and courageous. Sometimes we're not feeling very courageous. Sometimes we're not brave. Please help us to be brave and to live the way that you want us to live every day. Please help us this week to be able to tell someone else about you and what you have done for us. Amen. So have a great week. It looks like the verse has fallen off the board, but remember it anyway. And remember that God has promised to be with us if we are his people. Bye.